All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Millennials Are Old podcast. And you know what, Brian? I've been thinking, right? Of course, we are recording this in the romantic month. We are also, of course, recording this in Black History Month. So, Brian, how about this week? Let's review an incredibly romantic African American film.
A very urban film.
A very urban romantic film. So, in honor also of David Lynch passing away, because he's passed away about a month
In honor of
after.
him passing away.
In honor of him passing away, of course. I mean, he would love us to record a movie review of him in this style. I think we could both agree on that, where we call him a black director.
Great black director David Lynch.
Yes, exactly. So this week we're going to be reviewing the classic Nick Cage, David Lynch movie, Wild at Heart. But before we get into our review this week, Brian, let's bring back our segment, Cringe Generational Moment of the Week.
Cringe generational. All right, so this is a pretty good one, Taylor. I know I told you a bit about it. It's a story I've actually been following pretty much throughout 2024 to some degree. I followed it. Taylor, what do you know about Barry Keoghan and Sabrina Carpenter? Like specifically their relationship?
I know, obviously, that song that was made about their relationship. I can't remember what the song is at the
That's
moment.
that Me Espresso. I mean, actually, that whole album, that whole Sabrina Carpenter album, a lot of it is about Barry Keoghan, or seems to be.
Exactly. And I know that, obviously, Barry Keoghan is a great actor. I've seen his, dick and ass multiple times. And I know Sabrina Carpenter is a woman who is exclusively hot to gay guys, I've noticed.
So, well, yes, both very true. I think one of the hallmarks of a great male actor is the willingness to show their dick in a non-pornographic setting. I'm not saying you have to do that, but I think it's such a rare occurrence in mainstream American cinema that basically, if an actor is willing to do that, you got to give him some props. But on top of that, Keoghan, to me, legitimately one of my favorite young actors right now. Just to give a little crash course on this, I would say Sabrina Carpenter, similarly, one of the better pop stars right now. Her latest album, songs on it are pretty good, kind of have a kitschy retro 70s vibe at times. Throughout 2024, Sabrina Carpenter and Barry Keoghan were in a relationship to some degree. It was kind of tabloid fodder, or more like internet fodder now, because you talk about these things online rather than on the supermarket tabloids, right? Young people do anyways. A lot of these songs on Sabrina Carpenter's latest album, including her big hit Espresso, seem to be about Barry Keoghan. There are songs on there about her boyfriend who, she's in the same industry with, who goes to parties with her, and he's kind of like drinks too much and he is kind of belligerent and he doesn't really like to play all the games of, the industry or whatever. This seems to line up with things we know about Barry Keoghan. I'm not interested in getting into the weird gossipy side of it too much, but for some context, Barry Keoghan in interviews is very open about this relationship with Sabrina Carpenter. Seemed very enthusiastic about it. Would show up at his shows and dance really goofily and sing along to songs and lyrics that, were rumored to be about him. Sabrina Carpenter, on the other hand, a little more reserved. She, what's the cliche? She didn't like to put a title on their relationship. That's fine. None of our business one way or the other. It was very cute to me as a fan of Keoghan to see him in those moments. But also, yeah, who cares? Not my business. We've talked about stan culture and Zoomers a little bit before on the show, and particularly fans or stans, they're kind of unhinged. Officially in very late 2024, maybe very early 2025, I think late 2024, right before Christmas it was, yeah. Barry Keoghan and Sabrina Carpenter formally announced that their relationship was ending. Again, they don't really need to announce this. It's not anyone's business, whatever. Immediately, pop music stand-up becomes swirling with this thing of like, oh, it's because Barry Keoghan cheated on Sabrina Carpenter and because he's an alcoholic narcissist and just kind of weird, unfounded stuff, right? Like, I don't see any evidence of any of that. And it got to the point that Barry Keoghan has now removed all of his social media presence. Well, it might be back by now. I'm not sure. But it was removed for quite some time into the new year. And Sabrina Carpenter fans were showing up at the homes of Keoghan's grandmother and also his previous wife with whom he has a child with, harassing them and trying to get into contact with him. I'm less interested in this actual relationship than with just the bizarre response to it. Because, Taylor, you'll remember as millennials, the cliche was always, our generation, we're too invested in our celebrities and we care too much about them. And who cares about what all these nobodies on reality TV do? Do you remember anything really like stan culture? Like when you were a kid and kids were fans of celebrities? Do you remember any equivalent to that? Because I don't, to be honest.
A little bit, obviously there was the famous Bjork stalker.
Right, but that
There
was a
was
stalker. Right, the culture saw him as a stalker, right?
That is true. And I also do remember the absolute just insane furor during like the boy band craze of the late 90s. Like I remember there were some real psycho bitches back then. But I would say for the most part, this is pretty spectacular.
Well, it's spectacular in that it's like those examples you listed, and the boy band thing is the closest analog. And of course, you've got the Leave Britney Alone guy. Those, even in their own communities, as far as I understand, were outliers.
To be fair, the Leave Britney Alone guy, who's actually a woman now, fun fact, Brian,
Yeah, yeah,
shit
yeah, yeah.
lord, but they were ultimately right. Let's be clear here.
Yeah,
They were a little
yeah.
bit
The,
ahead of
the
the curve.
the the Leave Britney Alone video was unbelievably prescient, and I guess it's just something about like what have our parasocial relationships become? And I guess I'm thinking, what led to it? Is it just that we're so online? Is it that kids are so connected to everyone now, including their celebrities, that there's no compartmentalization? There's no separation between I'm a fan of this person and their work, and this person is like my friend who I need to protect potentially violently. It's such a weird phenomenon, and I don't think it's going away. I think this might just be the way that fandom, for lack of a better word, is expressed now.
No, absolutely. And, I was mentioning to you earlier in preparation for recording this episode, I really hope that we get our own anti-stand someday where, like, if we insult Kurt Wimmer enough, I want his, like, army of hot couch guy, like, loser white guys to come and harass us because we called him a loser.
I would love that. I would love to have anti-fans, particularly, yeah, Kurt Wimmer fans would be really fun. We could even find if they have like a message board. I'm sure they all still communicate on message boards or subreddits. They probably have a subreddit. We could drop a link to one of our shows in there, just like a bomb.
Could you imagine if we get like the one unironic Tom Myers fan, like the one unironic fucking Sonichu fan, and they're like,
I mean,
"How fucking dare you say shit about Tom Myers?
How
He's a
dare
genius."
you? I don't know if this is the case for Tom Myers. I assume it is. But at least with Sonichu now, you've got this. It's not a lot of people. You've got kind of like, not ironic, but like postmodern fans. It's really weird. They're kind of like, well, this is like outsider art. And it's like, I guess.
Well, you know what, Brian? Speaking of outsider art and Sonichu, I think that leads perfectly into this review here because I think just like Sonichu, this is very outsider. So once again, we are going to be reviewing Wild at Heart. It came out in 1990. And the first trivia fact I had here is that this was the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival that year. And interestingly enough, it was finished editing the day before it was shown at Cannes, which is wild.
Well, the production of this movie, this is insane. In some way, it was kind of rushed through pre-production in about 2 months.
God, Jesus fucking Christ, that's pretty wild.
Yeah, it was premiered at Cannes, and Cannes hated it. They hated it at the time.
Wait, they hated it, but they gave it the Palme d'Or?
The audience at Cannes hated this movie. At least segments
yes.
of it.
You are right. The audience hated it, but the critics liked it.
And I think it had to do with Lynch recently becoming a more mainstream figure, and then people kind of like people who previously would have championed him feeling like they had to like take him down a peg. That's sort of my theory.
Okay, so there was like hype backlash, basically.
I think so. I think they were punishing him for Twin Peaks, is my theory.
Oh, fair enough. And this movie was rated R. It was once again directed by David Lynch. Rest in peace, David Lynch. And the screenplay was written by him, of course. It was based on the novel of the same name by Barry Gifford, and it was produced by several gentlemen, one Monty Montgomery, Steve Golan, and I'm just going to try saying this guy's name because it's Icelandic. I'm going to try very hard. Sigurjón Sigvatsson. That's the best I could try, but he was apparently a very prominent Icelandic-American filmmaker, so I had to put his name in there. I tried the best I could.
We need that Icelandic representation. We don't get enough of it.
Yes, we do, Brian. We need the representation of a nation that has about a third of the population of the current county I live in.
Well, we are famously an Icelandic podcast. Taylor and I are both Icelandic Americans.
I'm currently in an Icelandic environment because it's negative 20 degrees with wind chill right now where I live.
Literally in an Iceland.
Yes. And we're talking about David Lynch, of course. So he was a filmmaker, visual artist, musician, and actor. He's been involved with more things than I could possibly imagine, but I did want to include a couple of them, of course. So he was the director of such films as Eraserhead, Elephant Man, the 1984 Dune movie, Blue Velvet, this movie, of course, Twin Peaks, the movie and the TV show. Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, Inland Empire, and once again, just so much more shit. I can't even fucking begin to delve deep into it.
Really a devastating loss. As people like David Lynch, I hate to say this, as they begin passing away, as they age, we are really seeing, like, there's never going to be filmmakers like David Lynch, like John Waters again. There will never be filmmakers who are that audacious and that inventive and that surreal who can exist making mid-sized movies in the studio system. The industry seems intent on not allowing anyone like that to ever exist again, and it's really a shame. Rest in peace, David Lynch. The world is a worse place for your passing.
Absolutely. And Barry Gifford, once again, was the author of the novel that this was based on. He's done a lot of shit, but I put nothing relevant to this episode, so I just moved on with that. And Monty Montgomery was really only majorly involved in this film, a movie called Portrait of a Lady, and he was apparently the cowboy in Mulholland Drive, which I've not seen Mulholland Drive, so I'll have to look that fucking up.
I just recently rewatched Mulholland Drive. It's actually not one of my favorite Lynch movies, but, I'm watching all of his stuff, when I get time to, in due with his passing. It holds up. This is my favorite Lynch film. Wild at Heart is. It's actually one of my favorite movies ever. Very happy to be doing it for February for our Valentine's Black History series and pairing it with True Romance, another favorite movie of mine. Pretty thematically similar, pretty thematically different, I would say.
No, very much so. And Steve Golan was a film and television producer, and he was also the co-founders of both Anonymous Content and Propaganda Films. And he was involved in just so much shit. Once again, look him up on Wikipedia. And Sigurjón Sigvatsson is an Icelandic producer and businessman, and once again, he was involved in so much shit. So, needless to say, everybody who was involved with the production of this movie, on the screenplay, director side, the production side, was involved in probably hundreds, if not thousands of credits combined. So, I didn't want to spend 3 hours going over it.
This is one of those things where I think it might be hard for younger people to kind of conceive of movies. Like, this was a fairly mainstream movie, again. And I don't know, I guess the closest thing to a studio making weird mainstream movies like this would be A24.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the closest, I would say.
This was really like the peak of Lynch as like a mainstream figure. This was made kind of, right hot off the heels of the first season of Twin Peaks, which like catapults him to this new level of like the mainstream. And people have mixed feelings about this movie because of that. There are some Lynch fans who feel like this is kind of like the beginning of the end for him. Obviously, I'm not one of those people. I think this is like peak Lynch in a lot of ways. There is an argument to be made that it's too linear, but he's selling out, for lack of a better term.
No, totally. I mean, I would say that, obviously talked about, the commercial peak of David Lynch, or at least around the time when he was really like sort of breaking out. Like, I mean, this movie had Nick Cage in it, and Nick Cage was a big fucking actor by 1990.
Yep.
Like, he was a very in-demand actor by the 90s.
Yeah, I was thinking about Cage today. I was thinking about the weird space he occupies now, and even at the time to some extent, and that he's kind of able to be, he's both a leading man and a character actor. He gets to kind of play both sides of being a career Hollywood actor. And I can't think of anyone else who's really been afforded that in mainstream cinema, in America at least.
Yeah, I really can't either. I would really have to like rack my brain for that because Nick Cage very much is an enigma. That's the best way I can describe him. He's very much an enigma for sure. Yeah. He's also a Nepo baby, but he is easily one of the most, if not the very most deserving Nepo baby in Hollywood. I genuinely believe.
No, everything I have read and listened to about Nick Cage and all, it seems like he has really, throughout his career, he made an effort to strike out on his own and to not take the easiest route. In his performances, in the films he chose, it seems like he really has committed to forging his own way, even with those privileges helping him.
Yes, and to be very clear to the audience at home who may have not listened to our other episodes or may not know, Nick Cage is literally the nephew of Francis Ford Coppola. His actual legal name is Nicholas Coppola, but he went by Nick Cage to try to literally distance himself from the Coppola name because he wanted to succeed on his own. Like, there's something to be said for that. So I do respect the fuck out of that.
This is also, I think, a great Cage performance just because it plays into what he does when he is working, I think, with a director who understands him.
Yes, very true. I feel like a lot of filmmakers, even the ones that work with him, like the vast majority of them don't really get Nick Cage. I mean, he's allowed to very much express himself in a lot of his movies, to be clear. But like, I don't think Neil LaBute really understands anything about fucking Nick Cage. I don't know if John Woo even really understood anything about Nick Cage when working with him. You know what the fuck I mean?
They're just happy to have him there, and then he's got enough star power, right, that he kind of can get away with making whatever weird choices. But in a film like this, or even I would say, although some people might disagree, a film like 8mm by Joel Schumacher, you've got a filmmaker who is kind of in tune with Cage's weird impulses and knows when to let him run wild and when to make him kind of pull back.
Exactly. And this movie has a runtime of about 124 minutes. It had a budget of $10 million and it grossed $14.6 million. And on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 66% critic score and an 81% audience score. So critics were definitely less warm on this movie, which, you know, was interesting because we talked about how Cannes audiences hated it, but critics liked it. But it seems like in retrospect, critics like it a lot less than audiences, which I find very interesting.
There are some criticisms that you'll see of this movie that, well, when we get to there are critics that have had issues with the ending of this movie.
Interesting because, well, never mind. We'll get to that point, but I find that very interesting, I'll be honest. So, getting into the synopsis. So, in Cape Fear, North Carolina, lovers Lula Fortune, played by Laura Dern, and the first trivia fact I had here in the synopsis was Laura Dern broke her no nudity clause for this film because she gets naked a lot and she fucks a lot in this movie. And Sailor Ripley, played by Nick Cage. And the next trivia fact I had here real quick. The snakeskin jacket Sailor wears in the film was actually Nick Cage's own, which makes sense because Nick Cage is a fashionista if there ever fucking was one.
It's so cool. So a couple of things both about Dern and Cage that relate to these. So in regards to Dern's nudity clause, she went on record saying she was willing to do nudity for this particular film because she felt like it was in keeping with the characters, that this was a romance story and sex is an expression of romance, and the way that it was filmed and telling that story, she felt was very appropriate. So I think that's a very mature kind of analysis of like the nudity in this, you know, if that's truly how she felt. Cage's snakeskin jacket, boy, I love it. I love Sailor. I think he's a really cool character, and I just want to lead into, I saw this movie a couple weeks ago at Laurelhurst Theater in Portland with the worst audience. I've been seeing a lot of...
Wait, really? The worst audience?
Hang on. So I think some people shouldn't be allowed to go to independent theaters. Like they should have to take like tests about like what they know about movies or what they like about movies before they can go to an independent theater and see like a cult film or a classic or whatever. And I've been seeing some Lynch movies in theaters. Saw Mulholland Drive, saw Blue Velvet last week. And one of the things you'll notice is like people, sometimes they don't know how to react to David Lynch. Because like his movies are funny. He has a sense of humor. But sometimes people will just kind of laugh because they're uncomfortable, or they'll laugh at something that's a little weird or a little surreal. Seeing Wild at Heart with the most quirked up fucking millennial audience you could imagine. People kept laughing when Sailor would say something or move, or they'd laugh at his jacket. And like he is like a weird character, but it's like, well, no, you're supposed to, Sailor's cool. He's like your audience identification character. But I feel like everyone was going, look at this weird dork that Nick Cage is playing. Like anytime he would say or do anything, and it really annoyed me.
So I
think the jacket's
so to be clear, Brian, for the audience, right, were there big chungus poly millennials there?
You know, I didn't see any polycules there, but there were definitely people that looked like they could have been in a polycule. But I can't confirm or deny that.
And you know what I will say, going back to the Laura Dern no nudity clause, so if she decided to stick with that for the rest of her career, the no nudity clause, that's fine. I'm totally fine with that. Because to be honest, I'll just say Laura Dern is definitely not. I was like, every time she got naked,
don't be
I'm
mean.
like, can she not?
I mean, you know.
I have bigger titties than her, I'll just say. Bigger ass, too. Might even have a bigger pussy, I'm not sure. But anyways, so he was there, separated after he is jailed for killing a man who attacked him with a knife. Once again, a self-defense, but to be clear, he did murder this man, or I should say manslaughter him. So, I mean, that is a prison sentence. The assailant was hired by Lula's mother, Marietta, played by Diane Ladd, who, fun fact, is actually Laura Dern's mother in real life. Upon Sailor's release 22 months later, Lula picks him up outside the prison where she hands him his snakeskin jacket once again. I love the snakeskin jacket. It's fucking cool as shit. They go to a hotel where she reserved a room, have sex, and go to see the speed metal band Power Mad. Now, we have talked about this fucking concert scene. It's awesome. So they play like speed/thrash metal. Fucking this guy just bumps into Laura Dern. Nick Cage beats him up. And then afterwards he goes into an Elvis song. Well, and that's awesome, by the way, because I told you, Brian, this scene where it's like speed metal, thrash metal, and then like a fucking crooner 50s, like, you know, show tune style thing happens. That's just Mr. Bungle. That's all that is.
Yeah, no, this was
like
the
Mr. Bungle
creation combination.
concert.
So, like, this is actually a pretty important scene in the movie thematically. I think because so you've got this whole thing. This guy bumps into Laura Dern, and Nick Cage he's like ready to fuck him up. This guy's being rude. Nick Cage fucks the guy up, but kind of like he retracts from that. And that's like a theme throughout this movie, right? Is that Sailor is thrust into violence and he's very like capable of violence, but that he wants to retreat from it. So he's always trying to like being pulled into acting violent and then wanting to make up for it. Of course, he makes up for it here by immediately after this altercation with this guy trying to go back to like being like he's very positive. He's like, well, we're at this rock and roll show. I'm singing to my girlfriend. And you'll see that like throughout the movie, Sailor is pulled into violence and then is trying to like retreat from it, even though he's again very capable of it. It's one of my favorite things about the movie.
No, he's a very multifaceted character, that's for sure. I wouldn't even say he's necessarily like a good person, but he is somebody who's trying to be good at the end of the day. He's trying to be good for the people in his life that he cares about.
I'd say he's pretty good. He doesn't instigate anything bad, even his kind of relationship, his feud with the mother is just based on her having contempt for him, right? She thinks he's low class. She's like, no daughter of mine's going to be with this guy. And she's doing whatever she can to like destroy him because of that. But he doesn't seem to harbor any real bitterness or animosity towards her. He just wants to be with his girlfriend and be nice to her, you know? And he's kind of a dumb guy, but I think that's what he's thinking at all points is, I want to be good to my girlfriend. And he doesn't do a lot of the things that you'd see a romantic lead and hero in a movie like this usually do. He never talks down to her. He very much seems to see her as his equal and as his like comrade on their adventure. Sailor, I mean, he had no parental guidance, so you can only ask so much of him. But he's doing the best with what he's got.
No, absolutely. So after that scene, they finally decide to break parole, or I should say Sailor decides to break parole and go to California, which of course is the dream of every Gen X boomer person. Let's go to California.
It's so awesome that if you grew up like in a flyover state or whatever, you think like we're going to go to California where there's no deserts and dead stretches of highway and empty barren land.
Yeah. Well, Brian, let's face it, you almost made it to California. You're only one state away.
I thought I was going there. I ended up sidetracked and I'm stuck in Portland now.
Exactly. You heard about the gold rush and you thought that was still going on, but it's like, fuck, I got stuck in Portland.
Yeah, and now you're like, God damn it.
Yeah.
So much cheaper here though, you know?
That's true. Marietta arranges for private detective Johnny Farragut, played by Harry Dean Stanton, which I love Harry Dean Stanton. I love him because he is the guy who looks like just the embodiment of lung cancer. He looks like he's always dying. Except for in this movie, he looks fairly lively, but he always just looks like a sentient pack of cigarettes in every movie he's ever been in.
Yeah, I mean, so many characters in this movie, and he's not the creepiest of all of them, but Stanton, a type of character that permeates this movie, just like the creep on the periphery of Sailor and Lula's existence. Otherworldly creepiness that's just kind of skulking around them. Yes, and he's probably the first character we meet like that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, so once again, Harry Dean Stanton's character is her on and off again boyfriend to find them and bring them back. Unbeknownst to Farragut, Marietta also hires gangster Marcellus Santos, played by the actor J.E. Freeman, to track them and kill Sailor. Santos' minions capture and kill Farragut, sending Marietta into a guilt-fueled psychosis. Now, here's the part of the movie where, honestly, it gets a little confusing for me. I'm just going to be real here. You know, it's one of those things where, just like with, you know, the audience that you saw the David Lynch movie with, and I know, Brian, this is your favorite criticism of every movie that's even slightly off kilter. You really have to be on drugs to make a movie like, I'm fucking kidding. I'm not going to. But I'll be honest with you, this is kind of the part of the movie where it kind of lost me a little bit, because I'm like, wait. So she hired one guy who's her off and on again boyfriend, but she also hired another guy and then he kills him, and I'm like, what the fuck?
She doesn't trust Harry Dean Stanton. He's too nice. So Harry Dean Stanton legitimately loves her, right? And he's acting kind of out of like, not a fatherliness, but like an obligation, right? But first of all, she's not sexually attracted to him. So she hires this other guy, right? Who she has this intense, weird old person sexuality oozing from her forth. It's all tied up in like her idea of like, she's this mother who needs this guy destroyed, and she's enlisting like the men in her orbit who she's saying like, I need one of you to destroy him for me. It's like your job to do this task. They're her flying monkeys because she's the Wicked Witch of the West, because the story we're watching is The Wizard of Oz to David Lynch.
Yes, very, very true. And we will certainly get onto that as more, but the parallels here are very obvious. Unaware of all the events happening back in North Carolina, Lula and Sailor continue on their way until they witness, according to Lula, a bad omen. The aftermath of a two-car accident, and the only survivor, a young woman dying in front of them. Now, I did read a little bit of trivia on the IMDb wiki, and apparently this was a idea brought up by David Lynch by just seeing the actress apparently and coming up with this like weird story about her dying in like a car accident or something. I can't remember what the exact story is, but it sounded very
very David Lynch. So most of his films, or a lot of his films, he cast without having any of the actors audition. He would meet an actor and he would decide that they felt right for the role, and then he would cast them. And that story is kind of keeping with this in that he met this young actress and he like sensed something in the way she carried herself or the way she performed, and he was like, oh, I need to write her into this movie to play this kind of like transformative character. Like, this is the moment, right? This is the moment when Sailor and Lula, they cross over, they go over the rainbow, right? They enter into this like surreality.
Yes, very much so. And there's also another scene that was not included in the synopsis, but I want to bring up where Lula describes a story of a former uncle that she had, or some type of weird guy.
Family friend.
Family friend, yeah. Essentially, yes. Who was played by Crispin Glover, who just the intro of him and is like, well, he believed that, he believed he was Santa Claus, or that he believed it was always Christmas? And when somebody told him that Christmas wasn't in June, and he just started screaming while dressed like Santa Claus, which, by the way, is like the most filthy Frank-ass character of all time. I love it. Like, when I first saw that, I had to pause the movie because I was like without breath laughing so fucking hard. Yeah. So I'm like, that is the most fucking filthy Frank-ass character of all time. Like, just a guy who is literally just like the most like autistic, like micro-targeted bit ever, and he just starts screaming and makes me laugh. I don't know why.
Also, you create that role for post Back to the Future Crispin Glover, and you drop him in it, and you're like, oh, here you go.
Yeah. By the way,
he's just totally game for it.
You know, Crispin Glover, we haven't really talked about Crispin Glover. I fucking love Crispin Glover. He's so fucking cool.
He's great.
He also, in my opinion, has maybe not the best, but maybe my single favorite death of any in the Friday the 13th series. Hey, Ted, where the hell's the corkscrew? And then he gets a corkscrew in the hand and then a machete in the head. That's so fucking hilarious. I love it.
That is so fucking good.
Which, by the way, that is like one of his more famous early roles, but it's really not all that like, characteristic of his actual filmography. But to me, it's one of his most iconic, easily. I love him in Friday the 13th Part 4.
I would say it is characteristic of what he became because he is like mutilated in an absurd way, and then you can retroactively fit that in with his weirder later roles, right?
That's totally fair. With little money left, Sailor heads for Big Tuna, Texas, where he contacts his old acquaintance, Perdita Durango, played by the actress Isabella Rossellini, who might be able to help them, although she secretly knows Lula's mother has a contract out for his murder. At an outdoor party, Lula and Sailor meet Bobby Peru, played by Willem motherfucking Dafoe, a.k.a. the best Wisconsinite of all time. A career criminal.
A classic Dafoe character, not scary or unnerving or really upsetting to look at all.
Yeah, that's the thing though, Brian. I do love Willem Dafoe, obviously.
Yeah, he's great.
But I love him because, like, he's interesting. So he's somebody who, like, he fucking hates Wisconsin. He hates his home state with a passion. I mean, I'm okay with it.
I've come around to, since I don't live there now, I've come around to, like, I want to stick up for it when people talk people who've never been there talk some shit and things. But boy, I hated it for a long time, man. And I hated it so much.
But it's interesting because he is able to really tap into, like, just the deep-seated, like, fucking sinisterness and repression and anger that exists in the state. It's awesome. Like, he is, even though he hates Wisconsin, he's actually kind of the embodiment of Wisconsinites in a lot of ways. Like, white Wisconsinites at the very bare minimum. He does a really good fucking job here. Like, if there was a Wisconsinite who was just allowed to be off-leash, they would all be Willem Dafoe. They would all be.
Willem Dafoe, let's do a little bit of cornball psychoanalyzing. He is someone who spent his whole life victimized by Wisconsin passive aggression and fake niceness, right? And has internalized all of it. And now when he is in a movie portraying a bad person, that sort of like loaded passivity oozes out of him. And I think you can see it in Bobby Peru. You can see it in fucking Platoon. You can see it in The Green Goblin.
Yes, 100%. So yeah, Willem Dafoe, even though you hate Wisconsin, let's be honest here, you do a pretty good job of embodying like just below the surface sinisterness of Wisconsinites. I will say that. You do a very good job.
Wisconsin excellence.
Yes, 100%. Lula, who has been feeling ill, tells Sailor she is pregnant with his child. While Sailor is changing their car's oil, Lula waits for him in the hotel room. Peru enters the room and threatens to sexually assault Lula, forcing her to ask him to have sex with her before leaving. This traumatizes Lula, who was also raped as a child. Now, obviously...
Well,
Oh, yeah, sorry, Brian, go ahead.
I mean, he molested her.
Well, he does molest her, yes, to be very clear.
Yeah.
But I would say also the just very, very just quick, brief scenes of her past sexual abuse are like
Yeah.
awful. They're
They're
heartbreaking.
yeah.
They're awful. And also,
One of
is
the
there a scene like right afterwards where it's implied that she had like a forced abortion or something?
Yes. One of the things, since we're getting into kind of the violence against women thing, and I think this will pair well, not long ago we talked about Sam Peckinpah, of course. David Lynch, he did vote for Gary Johnson at one point. He was pretty openly a libertarian. A hallmark of his filmmaking is a real sensitivity to like the emotional and physical violence that women are made to endure. It is central to this film. It's central to Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks. And I know that there's been some people, millennials and younger, who are watching his films for the first time, who are maybe kind of shocked by seeing some of the violence in there. But I would say if you're looking for like a cult director who really spent a lot of time and care in like understanding kind of what women go through and the way that society perceives women that are, victimized, you aren't going to do much better than David Lynch. Again, that's a central theme of this film, but even more so of Twin Peaks, like the whole series.
Well, that's the thing, Brian. You talked about his very, obvious libertarian tendencies, but he also grew up in Montana, and like Mountain State libertarians, like half the time are the most fascist people to ever exist, and half the time they're just like basically liberals who like weed and want to be left alone.
Right. Well, and I think it's a type of libertarian who still obviously doesn't have the same politics as you or I for obvious reasons, but who kind of doesn't exist anymore. Because you used to have these libertarians that were more or less kind of liberals, like they're like small government liberals, or that's maybe how they perceive themselves. And, they probably had bad opinions about social programs and, maybe if push came to shove, believed some fucked up shit. But in practice, especially when you get to like more like working class and middle class people who identified as libertarians, they weren't exactly what they are now. Whereas I feel like every libertarian now is like an objectivist. I don't think that was always the case, especially with like boomers. I think there's a little more wiggle room there and a little bit more of a gray area politically for those guys and girls.
No, exactly. So after all that, not knowing about Peru's abuse of Lula, Sailor agrees to accompany him to a bar. Over beers, Peru enlists Sailor's help in robbing a nearby feed store, which allegedly keeps $5,000 in cash on hand. Now, was this Sneed's Feeds? Or was that Sneed's and Feeds?
I don't think this takes place in the same universe.
Yes. That is honestly one of the best Simpsons jokes of all time. I don't care what anybody says. It's fucking hilarious.
That's a classic. It's especially a classic for that era. It's one of the jokes from that era that I keep coming back to, and I go, there's some gems sneaking around in there. The thing with Bobby enlisting Sailor to hold up this feed store for $5,000 is prior to Lula, being pregnant, they're aimless, right? They live this dreamlike existence of traveling from one hotel to another and having beautiful sex and then looking cool, right? That's their life. So there's this understanding Sailor has, at the very least, that he can't continue to do that if he's going to have a child. The funny part of this is like Bobby Peru is able to pressure Sailor into going along with this act that his instincts tell him not to do, with the promise of a few $1,000s. Presumably, I don't know. I know the cost of living was lower back then, but I'm not sure that would have gotten Lula through labor, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, depending on all the complications, very much so for sure. And also, Brian, I do want to mention the parallels with another classic Nick Cage movie, Raising Arizona. They have a baby in that movie and he robs a store for diapers, where in this movie, the woman's pregnant and he's robbing a feed store, and it goes way worse than the one in Raising Arizona.
Maybe that's something that Nick Cage took from his real life and he brought into films.
Yeah, he was method acting. He robbed a store at gunpoint.
I can't think of an actor who is less method than Nick Cage, to be honest.
Yeah, really. The robbery goes spectacularly wrong when Peru unnecessarily shoots the two store clerks. Peru then admits to Sailor that he had been hired to kill him, and Sailor realizes he has been given a pistol with dummy ammunition. Chasing Sailor out of the store, Peru is about to kill him when the sheriff's deputy opens fire on him, and Peru accidentally blows his own head off with his own shotgun. Great death scene, by the way, too.
Spectacularly gory. This is one of
those...
And
I believe also they had to cut part of that to get an R rating because they would have gotten an X rating if they would have kept it completely uncensored.
Yeah, that's pretty much been remedied. I'm pretty sure that the uncut version is now the one you're going to default to seeing pretty much any edition you get of this. But, if you're a purist and you're searching this out, I would be wary of that. There's about a few seconds missing, or word that was missing for a long time, and it's Peru's awesome head explosion. It's one of the best head explosions in cinema, truly.
Absolutely. So after this calamity, Sailor is arrested and sentenced to 6 years in prison, which, by the way, nowadays, 6 years would be pretty light sentence for this. I'm going to be real here.
Yeah.
Like, in some states, the fact that Peru died during this and the fact that a cop was, like, shot as well, that would have been an automatic life sentence. Might even have been the death penalty shit.
Yeah.
So 6 years, I know things were a little bit different back in the early 90s before, like, the real wave of, like, tough on crime shit happened, but 6 years even back then would have been pretty light for this, especially for someone who was already a convicted felon. But, hey, whatever, it's a fucking movie. While Sailor's in jail, Lula has their child. Upon his release 5 years later, Lula decides to reunite with them. Rejecting her mother's objections over the phone, she throws water over her mother's photograph. And by the way, isn't that where, like, it disappears, like, her picture disappears in the picture frame, indicating that she's the Wicked Witch or some shit?
Yeah, there's not a lot of contention. There is some discussion about how you're supposed to interpret all of the Oz imagery here. Most people lean towards it being symbolic. I'm going to throw something out there. It's possible that the Oz imagery in this film is to some extent literal.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, obviously, just like anything, there could be possible symbolism, but I think it's quite literal for a David Lynch movie.
Yeah, like, I think if you wanted to interpret the Oz stuff as being, obviously there's this thing with David Lynch being really into, like, Jungian psychology and the collective unconscious and our shared cultural memories, and it's pretty clear how The Wizard of Oz plays into that. But I think in terms of this movie, the Oz stuff is pretty straightforward. I don't think it's hiding any sort of cryptic or, like, deeper, like, theological thing. I think it is straightforwardly the themes of Wizard of Oz corresponding with the themes of Wild at Heart. I know some people hate that, but that is how I interpret the movie.
No, I can certainly see that. So when Sailor meets Lula and their son, he reveals he'll be leaving them both, having decided that mother and son are better off without his influence. While he is walking a short distance away, Sailor encounters a gang whose members surround him. He insults them and they quickly knock him out. While unconscious, he sees a vision in the form of Glinda the Good Witch, who tells him, quote, "Don't turn away from your lover, Sailor," unquote. When he awakens, Sailor apologizes to the men, tells them he realizes the error of his ways, and then runs after Lula. The photograph of Marietta in Lula's house sizzles and vanishes. I just mentioned that, but there we go. As there's a traffic jam on the road, Sailor begins to run over the roofs and hoods of the car to get back to Lula and pace their son in the car. Sailor sings "Love Me Tender" to Lula, having earlier said that he would only sing that song to his wife. And that's the end of the movie. It ends with the song in the credits.
And it ends, of course, with Sailor finally successfully being able to run away from violence and to embrace love, which he has kind of straddled the line of doing throughout the movie, you know. Also, just a great thing, Sailor calls the men who assail him homophobic slurs and then apologizes. A great Nick Cage scene.
Yes, very much. The most woke scene of the early 90s. I think we could both agree on that.
Yes.
He learns the error of his ways after saying hateful language.
And apologizes, and then runs away.
Yes. Well, speaking of apologizing after being homophobic and running away, that leads perfectly into our Amazon reviews before our final thoughts. Now, Brian, the Amazon review section for this were fucking awful. They were bad Amazon reviews. And I don't mean necessarily bad like they were stupid, but they were just boring. Some of the most boring Amazon reviews I've ever seen. I had very little to add here. So I only have two, so I want to get through these real quick. So the first one here is from Brendan Klein, who gives us 4 stars. And the head of the review says, "One of Lynch's underrated classics." And the body of the review says, "The thing with this film is that even some die-hard Lynch fans don't like it," as we just mentioned, of course. "Too mainstream? Hardly. This is defiantly," they said that one wrong. I think they meant definitely, but they put defiantly.
It is defiantly.
Yes. A weird period in Lynch's career. He was trying formal narratives and using stories, unlike Eraserhead. A great film, but essentially it goes nowhere. Which, I want to be very clear, this is now only the second David Lynch movie I've ever seen. And that is definitely going to go into my final thoughts here. I've only seen Eraserhead in this movie. I have not seen any other David Lynch.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I actually have 2 David Lynch movies on my Criterion collection that I just haven't watched yet because I just haven't had the time to get around to it.
Can I ask which 2 are they?
Mulholland Drive and Blue Velvet.
Okay, so both good. Mulholland Drive is one of my least favorite Lynch movies. Still good. Blue Velvet is fantastic, Taylor. You'll love it.
Okay. I mean, I've heard a little bit of it from the fucking Acid Bath album.
Yeah.
He made that completely surreal, then tried this, which has a moving story. Then decided it would be best to stick with surreal and did Lost Highway. I'm saying I like all these films. Just this one doesn't get the respect it deserves. It's not as weird as all of his other films, but weird nonetheless. Great performances all around. And in the end, when Cage is beat up by the gang for calling them homosexuals, his apology is one of the greatest lines he's ever delivered.
Yeah. So I do want to push back. This reviewer, this is a pretty boring and a mostly inoffensive review. This guy does a thing that bugs me that a lot of people do when they talk about Lynch. I think people overstate the weirdness of his filmography. Of course, Eraserhead is this Warhol influenced and body horror influenced weird, not, I hate using the word weird like that, but it's kind of non-linear. It's more images and vibes than like a strict narrative. But for the most part, I mean, like his films are narrative. Like Mulholland Drive and Blue Velvet and yes, Wild at Heart and Lost Highway, they're pretty straightforward. They're a little strange. There's surreal stuff, but I feel like people overstate this. Like David Lynch's movies are crazy. They're so hard to understand. Like they are narrative movies.
No, absolutely. Like, once again, even though I have not seen many David Lynch movies, I can at least see the framework of what he's trying to go for in both Eraserhead and this movie. Like, I can definitely see what the fuck he's trying to do here. And then our final review here is from Bookworm, who gives this 1 star. And the head of the review says, "Egads!" And the body of the review says, "This movie has not aged well. I can see now that we can thank David Lynch for all these subsequent films with completely bizarre, out there characters and virtually zero plot," which I think we can both agree is not true.
Yeah, what? I guess on paper, the plot to this movie is scant in that it's more like about themes and character interactions, but like there's definitely plot to this movie.
No, 100%. Characters alone do not make an interesting story. There are plenty of strange, far out, okay, I'll admit it, interesting Fellini-esque characters in this movie, and David Lynch does have a skeleton of a story working, but it gets lost as a subplot, is seemingly tacked on to extend a movie that should really end earlier. And all these tossed in Wizard of Oz references that have nothing to do with anything at all, other than to supposedly add depth to a meaningless film, which I don't agree with that either.
God. No, like Sailor and Lula are living a parallel of Wizard of Oz. So it's important to them because they're this badass, cool, edgy, kind of heavy metal rockabilly couple that's excited by danger. But like ultimately what they want is like magic and whimsy and to escape the doldrum of their lives and their tyrannical mother and just be in a world of like love and fancy. They love Wizard of Oz because that's what they feel in their hearts. It represents something to them.
Yeah, exactly. When they say meaningless, and it's like, I would say it's actually very purposeful. Very purposeful.
Yeah, and I think it's actually pretty, it's not like some super cryptic random thing. It's actually, I mean, it's spelled out pretty clearly, especially like at the end when Glenda the Good Witch is visiting Sailor, the magic of that story is the attainability of love for Sailor. It's very on the nose.
Yes. No, absolutely. There are traces of dark comedy exemplifying situations that can arise in new relationships, secrets discovered, parental disapproval, etc. But even that is watered down with scenes that are so disturbing and violent for no real reason other than, again, to add some kind of depth, which I also don't agree with. Like, obviously there are scenes of like pretty severe violence and, sexual trauma and all these things, but once again, they are meaningful. They do add depth to the story. I don't agree with this reviewer at all.
Yeah, and also I would say, like, the violence in this film can be pretty rough to watch, particularly, like, and it's not even that it's, like, physically very damaging, it's just, like, the psychology of it. When Bobby Peru, assaults Lula and those, it's hard to watch. I don't actually think the violence in this film is insanely protracted or graphic.
No, I wouldn't
I
wouldn't necessarily agree either, but I can definitely understand for a certain type of audience who may have went blindly into this, because to be honest with you, Brian, when you recommended this, I saw, of course, Nick Cage, Laura Dern, it's like, romantic, Lovers on the Lamb type movie. This really was not what I expected, I'm going to be honest with you, so I can imagine people who knew about David Cage is the guy who made fucking... David Cage, right?
I know that name. I know I've heard it.
David Cage is the guy who created fucking Detroit Become Human or something like that, Fahrenheit, Heavy Rain.
Oh, no,
this guy is fucking nuts. I would recommend looking up a Let's Play later of, and not even necessarily like, the PewDiePie style Let's Play, but look up like a gameplay or whatever of Fahrenheit. That game is bonkers. That game is, honestly, David Cage and Nick Cage should be in a David Cage game.
I know Heavy Rain because Slowbeef streamed it for a while.
Honestly, people hate David Cage, but I love him because he is just not afraid to be the biggest fucking idiot game maker of all time and is willing to put the dumbest shit in his video game, so I have to respect David Cage for that. Only the French could do that. But anyways, my error aside. what type of depth Lynch was trying to portray in this movie remains questionable. It almost makes me think that it is all farce and Lynch's real purpose is to pull the wool over our eyes, making us think it is a very deep and meaningful film when it really is far from it. What were the French thinking when they gave this Best Picture at the Cannes? Which, by the way, they didn't give it Best Picture, they gave it Palme d'Or, but whatever, never mind. Okay, I'll admit when this movie came out, I did like it, but I think I was more blinded by my, juvenile hots for Nicolas Cage, which, okay, to be clear, were there really that many women who were into Nick Cage looks-wise? Like,
there are, though. I think there are, and I think at this time he was kind of, you've got this era, Moonstruck era, he was kind of a Hollywood pretty boy.
that's fair. And, we were talking a little bit earlier about, I can't remember who we were talking about, but a guy who's willing, we're talking about Barry Keoghan who's willing to get naked. By the way, Brian, in the movie Xandali, if you freeze for one frame, which I did when I was still doing the Cage Fight podcast, there's so much sex in that movie, there's so much nudity, but I'm like, I swear to God, I saw just Nicolas Cage's ball sack. And if you freeze frame it on one pixel, you can see Nick Cage's ball sack in Xandali.
I'm so glad you've shared this information with me.
By the way, I think I might have told you this, but I genuinely do believe that Xandali is the inspiration for The Room. I genuinely do believe that. There is a lot of similarities with that movie. Would have came out around the time that Tommy Wiseau moved to America. Was really getting involved with movies. And it takes place in New Orleans, which Tommy Wiseau famously said he's from New Orleans, which of course is not true.
Classic NOLA accent on Tommy Wiseau.
Yes, but honestly though, Brian, watch Xandali. I genuinely do believe once again that Tommy Wiseau got the inspiration for The Room for that movie. I'm 100% serious.
Yeah, I might need to do that.
It's also got Judge Reinhold in it. It's literally the plot of The Room, but Nick Cage is way more rapey than fucking Greg Sestero's character in The Room. Way more rapey. In fact, basically every sex scene between Xandali and Nick Cage is literally just Nick Cage raping her. And it's not even like a gray area stuff. It's like, oh yeah, he just literally committed a sex crime. Like, it's wild. No. It's one of the most misogynist movies I've ever seen in my entire life.
Well, now I just think it'll make me sad when I watch it, because I don't want to see Nick like that. I love him.
No, that's totally fair. But you can also see Nick Cage's ball sack for one frame.
Well, that is intriguing.
Yeah. Oh, God. Now that I'm older and wiser, I can see the movie is really not much about anything. Only Lynch trying to manipulate his audience for far too long. I don't agree with that either. What the fuck is he manipulating?
It's a love story. It's about, transitioning out of youthful rebellion into, the embrace of, love and stability. Even at the end, when Sailor says they'd be better off without him and tries to leave, he's convincing himself that he's doing that for their benefit, but it's because he's afraid to embrace fatherhood and husbandry and all that shit. That is what the movie is about.
No, absolutely. All right, so that is our final review here. Now, before we get to our pluggables, let's get to our final thoughts. Now, Brian, if you don't mind if I go first, because to be honest with you, I feel like I'm going to have the most contentious take here. I'm going to be real here. I didn't love this movie. I liked it. I understood what it was going for, but I think this movie's way too fucking long. I think this movie's way too long for what it's trying to go for. I think this movie could have been a pretty tight 90 minutes and I would have been okay with it. But I think there's just too many vignettes. I think there's too many just moments that and not to agree with our last reviewer here, because I don't really agree with them really at all. But I really wish this movie was just more tight narratively. I'm just going to be real here. I love the Dell, subplot because I thought it was hilarious. And, I like, Harry Dean Stanton because, of course, I love seeing Harry Dean Stanton in anything. I liked the Wizard of Oz stuff in it. Yeah. Of course, I love seeing Nick Cage and stuff. Laura Dern's a great actress. Of course, I don't think she's very hot, but she's a great actress, so I appreciated seeing her in this movie. But I just think there's just too much meandering shit in this movie, and it kind of bored me at certain points. I'm going to be real here.
So I have heard other people say that. I don't think that's necessarily the standard opinion, but there's a healthy amount of people that agree with you. I don't agree. It is long, but I don't think it's too long. I appreciate the time we spend kind of sidestepping from the narrative to kind of get very Lynchy with it, for lack of a better word, because I like the world and I like the performances that we inhabit and things, and I like kind of spending more time with the themes of this movie. The length doesn't bother me, but I understand what you're saying when people say you could tighten the film up to the core narrative and probably make it, a tight 90. And the core narrative would remain untouched. I think that's probably true. For me, so this is a favorite film of mine. Of course, it's part of my favorite micro-genre of film, the Lovers on the Lamb micro-genre. I don't love it quite to the degree that I do True Romance, where every time I watch it, I just have this pure kind of joy from all the performances and all the dialogue and all the excitement and the romance. The themes of it really resonate with me. It's also kind of the weird kind of like neo-noir and like rockabilly stuff that Lynch incorporates, but it's a little off kilter. It's a little dreamlike. It's things like, for example, Sailor being this weird rockabilly guy that loves the band Power Trip for some reason, and it's things like that. I think the way that Lynch, kind of the whole thing of his filmography, that he ties in all of these seemingly disparate, Americana touchstones, and he ties them together in this way that feels both really alien and familiar, is really appealing to me. And just because of what I like and what my interests are, him tying that up into kind of like a rebellious young lovers movie is like right up my alley. As far as like Lynch films go, well, this is my personal favorite. I wouldn't necessarily say that it should be someone's first Lynch experience. If you're going to jump into Lynch, your first one should probably be Eraserhead because it's so weird and iconic. But really, like, maybe the best entry point for pretty much anyone would be either Blue Velvet or, the first season of Twin Peaks, in that they're pretty accessible. In case of Twin Peaks, well, it's longer because it's a TV show. It's very funny, but it's still very surreal. Deep grapples with a lot of the same good and evil themes. So again, like, this is my personal favorite Lynch movie just because it resonates with me. I don't think it's like his best made movie. I'd probably have to give that to Elephant Man or Blue Velvet just because they're such impeccably crafted movies.
Hell yeah, no, totally. And like I said, I want to be clear, I didn't hate this movie. I think this is a very solidly well-made movie. There were certainly elements of it that I did really like, but once again, I just think it just meandered way too much. And I did get bored at certain points, especially when they got to Big Tuna. That's when a lot of the movie kind of fell apart for me. Like, I just don't identify with pretty much any of this element. And not that I personally have to identify with a movie that I fucking am watching, right?
But it helps, like, yeah.
But it really does help, for sure. And it's just like, there's just too much shit going on.
I've definitely heard that from other people about this film too, including other Lynch fans.
No, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. But, once again, this is only the second Lynch movie I've ever watched. The first one was Eraserhead. I definitely will watch the other two movies in my Criterion Collection series. I definitely will watch Twin Peaks, the TV series, and the movie at some point. And I also do want to talk about, obviously, the micro genre of Lovers and the Lamb movies. Of course, we reviewed many of them so far. I mean, True Romance is fucking phenomenal. Like, that is a fucking fantastic movie. Fucking Bonnie and Clyde, very influential. That's also a great fucking movie. God, what was another Lovers and the Lamb movie?
The Getaway.
More. No, ones that we reviewed.
No, I think we've only done True Romance and Bonnie and Clyde, to be honest. And we've talked about doing Badlands, but we've not done it.
Oh, okay, fair enough. But yeah, I like that subgenre too, but this one didn't quite hit for me. And I'm going to be honest too, like, I've just been meaning to watch this movie for a long time. I believe this was literally the next movie we were going to review on Cage Fight before Jess and Mike ended the series. I swear to God, that's true. And I was looking forward to this movie for a long time. And, I saw the poster. Of course, I love Nick Cage. And another thing that I think was really disappointing is that there's really not a whole lot of Nick Cage freak out in this movie. Like, during the robbery, he screams, which is great. And obviously, there's a lot of Nick Cage's eccentricities with, like, his Elvis stuff, which he's very infamous for being a big Elvis fan in real life. But there just wasn't enough, like, Nick Cage, like, balls to the wall for me to really, like, grab onto either.
Well, and I think the reason for that, so I listened to a few and read a few interviews with Cage and with Dern and with Lynch in preparation for this. I think Cage, so he did contribute a lot to his performance. I think part of the reason you see less of the freakouts is because he felt very confident in the material. And I think he and Lynch understood each other really clearly. He maybe didn't feel the need to make such big demonstrative kind of statements in his performance. Because as funny as it is to say, because this is not a subtle movie, this is a little bit more of a subtle Nick Cage performance. He does hang back more often.
Yes, true. And very famously, the reason that Nick Cage freakouts happen is usually when he's, like, not given good direction generally. That's usually what happens. Or at the very least, he's given more free reign to be a fucking weirdo. Like, either of those scenarios is the reason that 95% of Nick Cage freakouts happen.
Yes. And that's the other thing, is that this is an earlier Cage performance. But so as I understand it, Cage was given quite a bit of free reign to interpret here. But I think he felt such a comfortability with Lynch and with the material that maybe he didn't feel the need to do that. By his own account and by Lynch's, the two of them really gelled. And so maybe he was so comfortable, with the role and with the direction he was giving that he didn't feel the need to kind of push back against it.
No, totally. All right. So, but yes, I believe we have exhausted the discussion here. So, once again, this is Wild at Heart, a great film that you and I think, both generally agree is quite good. I don't have as much admiration for this movie as you do, but I do think this is a great entry into the canon on Lovers on the Lamb movies and also great Valentine's Day movies, especially if you're looking for something a little bit more off kilter with your alt fucking big titty goth GF girlfriend.
Yeah, they'll love it. They'll love it.
All right, so with all that out of the way, let's get to our pluggables here. So you can follow me at Carlos Chantor on Twitter.com. And as well, please follow and subscribe to us on both our YouTube and our Spotify, where we are uploading every episode simultaneously to both platforms. And as well, as always, please donate to the Lucifer and the Father campaign. Of course, our good friends Scott, Sean, and Robert are creating a fantastic series. They have one episode out on YouTube right now. Of course, I'm going to link that in the episode description, as I've been doing for quite a while. They have, last time I checked, about $2,000 raised out of their $10,000 total. But you know what? Once again, please donate to the campaign. They're good guys. They want to create a great series. We love how ambitious it is. And we just want to see the rest of the series completed. And of course, as we've been promising for the last probably 20 episodes at this point, if you donate to the campaign, send us an email, send us a YouTube comment, basically send us any proof that you donated to the campaign. And we will, within reason, not like $5,000, but we will, within reason, about 20, 25 bucks, match your donations. So please help Scott, Sean, Roberts' dream become a reality by helping them finish the series monetarily and morally speaking. And, well, speaking of moral, as of last week, I believe, before recording, the Luigi Mangione Defense Fund is now the official Luigi Mangione Defense Fund. So we are once again asking people to donate to the Luigi Mangione legitimate official defense fund, and we will actually match those donations this time. We genuinely will.
Yeah, now that it is official, I of course encourage everyone to donate, and I had trust in the organizers, but now that it has been officially accepted by Luigi and his council, please donate to it. This is, he's innocent. There's no evidence linking him to anything. He's being railroaded. He's being given a show trial as a terrorist that's being overseen by corporate oligarchs, and he needs all of the support he can get. He seems to have good counsel, both skilled and sympathetic counsel. He does, of course, have widespread public support. Any more support we can give him, he truly needs, because, boy, they are not going to let him off easy. I really don't think so.
No, 100%. And to be clear, we're talking about, obviously, corrupt, fucking legal precedent here. Not only is he being charged by an openly corrupt DA, Alvin Bragg, but he's also in the city, which is ran by a guy who literally got off of charges based on Trump's strong-arming that also extremely corrupt DA. So to be very clear, there is so much judicial and legal malpractice going on with this fucking trial already, let alone all the shit they're throwing the book at him for. So Luigi needs all the fucking help he can fucking get. So once again, if you donate to the campaign, we will, within reason, once again, match the donations for both Lucifer and the Father and Luigi Mangione. So to be very clear here, we will not drain our bank accounts for it, but we will definitely help the cause. And also, as we said before, keep talking about Luigi, keep hyping him up, talk about how fucking cool he is, just keep him in the motherfucking news cycle, because as of last week also, he appreciates it, because he finally was able to put out a public statement showing how much he appreciates all the help and all the good words about it.
Yes, really some of the best news we've gotten in a few weeks here. We're very glad to see it. We are sending thoughts and prayers and, most importantly, money to our boy Luigi.
Yes, and to be clear, as of this episode, now that I know, because once again, this is a very recent development that it was official, I will legitimately now donate to the fund, because I was kind of waiting for it to be official before, then I'm going to be real here.
Well, and I was like, I felt the same way. I was like, well, I put $20 in just to do it. I was like, it's $20, whatever. And I was like, oh, we should talk. I didn't feel bad talking about it on the podcast. And I would say before, I'd kind of say, if you aren't comfortable giving money, then keep talking about Luigi, which I've done in the last few episodes. But I am very comfortable, 100% comfortable. If this is the official illegal fund for Luigi Mangione, please donate to it. If you donate through us, we will match within reason whatever you donate. And again, even more importantly, perhaps, keep talking about Luigi, because, the news cycle changes so fast now, and boy, they wanted it to change on him when they realized the public wasn't going to turn against him.
No, absolutely. All right, and enough about us, glizzing up his glizzy on Luigi. Brian, do you have any pluggables of your own?
So, as always, follow us at the Facebook page Millennials Are Old, and you can follow us at Millennials Are Old Pod on Instagram and Threads. Threads is being kind of shit lately. I'm noticing an influx of right-wing accounts. Kind of sucks, because there weren't very many up until about a week ago on Threads. So we'll see how that turns out. But yeah, Millennials are old pod at Instagram or Threads. Best way to reach out to me on the show if you want to argue with us, if you want to harass us, if you want to send us cringe you find, especially cringe that is indicative of a certain generation. That's great. If Threads becomes as unusable as Twitter, which I'm officially not active on Twitter now, but maybe I'll get the Millennials our old Blue Sky account. I don't really want to be on Blue Sky. It looks really embarrassing and it looks like the people that post on it suck. But, if Threads becomes overrun by Nazi libertarians, I guess I'd rather be on Blue Sky with a bunch of soy libs than with that.
No, absolutely. All right, but you know what? Talking about obviously cucked libs, fascists, libertarians, all the fucking things in the world. I think that ends our review here because I think this is a very politically nebulous film. I think we could both agree on that. And then to end the review here, Brian, speaking of wild at heart, I think I am wildly exhausted. And deep in my heart, I know that we both need to fall asleep.
Wild at heart, try sleepy at bed, right?
You need some sleepy time tea because your heart is too wild.
Yeah, because I'm a little sleepy bear.
Exactly. So have a good night, everybody. Sleep tight. Of course, don't let Uncle Del and his cockroach-filled underwear bite. And also, next week, we are going to continue on our Valentine series for at least one more episode. And next week, we are going to have a movie that I think is far less surreal than this movie, but I think might also make you, the female fans, wet, and our male audience extremely hard, and also their pussies wet, too. I could be wrong about that, but I have no idea.
We're straight up reviewing pornography on the next episode, guys.
Yes. So have a good night, everybody, when we are going to review all of Brazzer's fucking content. So have a good night, everybody.